Hi, I'm the True Wise Gamer, giving off my vast knowledge so you may understand games a bit better. Today is actually a request this time from CR92. Thank you for the request. This request was actually one of the few reasons why I actually did this review, or at least the one that finally pushed me to do it, since I actually originally planned to do it a long time ago, but the footage got corrupted and I just lost all heart to do it. But with this request, I finally did it, and here we are. Today, we're covering a really interesting game. Fullmetal Alchemist, The Broken Angel. This game's actually very interesting since not only is this game made by the creator herself, but it was also produced by Square Enix. Though that's not particularly a surprise since they actually helped produce the manga as well. People actually forget that little part. This was also developed by Rakshin, or I don't know how to pronounce that name ever, for the life of me. And not a lot of people know of them, but I do know they did make a game that I really did enjoy. Wizardry, The Forsaken Lands, and the Bomberman 64 game. Or at least I've heard the latter are actually good. But the preamble has gone on for too long, so let's begin with Fullmetal Alchemist, The Broken Angel. The game begins with, wait, what? Animation? That is actually interesting, and voice acting to match too. This game's animation was before the show came out, and ironically the dub for both were actually cast for this before, well, as I said, finished. Meaning they ironically most likely used this game's character actors just for this show. I find that super interesting in a matter of fact, which can actually explain so much since the voice acting is, well, not bad, just lacking, as though the actors have no idea how they usually should sound, though they are still decent at times, or maybe it's a bit of the audio mixing a bit with Al's voice, but maybe just me. But still, regardless, good. Anyway, the game begins with an explanation of what's up, though weirdly enough, it's not enough or sufficient enough to get you to where it needs to be, since it feels like you really need to read the manga just to understand some things. So I'll try to explain, but if it's bad, my bad. In this universe, alchemy, instead of being nonsense, was an actual real science that allows people to transmute materials into other things, though it still follows the rules of equivalent exchange. Basically, you put in what you get. You can't get more out of something than what you used, or else suffer a rebound that might do something to you, and it all depends on what the user is actually making. Anyway, Fullmetal Alchemist follows the story of the Elric brothers, two alchemy brothers who, after losing their mother, they use forbidden alchemy. The type you can't use, mostly because it doesn't really work, and its rebound is so severe that most people die using it, that being human transmutation. Or, the better way to put it sometimes, trying to actually bring someone back to life from the dead, or just making new life in general. The rebound was less severe than actual death, but still a very heavy cost. Edward, the older brother, lost a leg, while Alphonse lost his entire body, and barely survived with the help of Edward, bounding his soul to a suit of armor, which I have to wonder. How the hell did Edward know he could do that, or even was possible? Maybe it was in one of their books. Actually, if this is from the first anime, this actually makes more sense if anything. Though for Edward to do that, he needed to actually give up his right arm just to do it, so yeah. After what happened to Ed, he basically broke down, until Colonel Mustang, a guy from the military, came in here just to find Edward's father, and basically said, "Join the military, kid. You got the balls to do it." Well, that's how it basically felt to me, but anyway. After that, he basically decided to get some automail, prosthetics that one can use as an artificial limb. Works pretty well as much, though with the cost of maintenance, some people don't actually use them, so there's that. And so they agreed to join the military, or at least Edward did, because Al, since he's a suit of armor, meaning he would be found out immediately, and they would still be charged with the crime of human transmutation. And they plan to use the military's assets to basically find a way to get their bodies back, or at least Al's body, since again, he's a suit of armor and they don't know how long that will last. That's the basic setup for the series, and it's really good. I mean, like, when the big twists and turns happen, it's really all good. This game actually takes a little around, if I remember correctly, 17 to 16. I'm not entirely sure. My memory is a bit off. I haven't watched the series in a while. But basically, after meeting a character named Dr. Marco, they're heading back to Central to find his notes to make the Philosopher's Stone. A stone that can basically cancel out equivalent exchange and just make whatever you want, mostly. It's a fable that nobody knows how to make, and that's where I would again need to repeat, this game's not very self-contained, because if you don't know what's up, you're going to be entirely lost on a few things. An actual example of this problem is actually Armstrong himself. While yes, an interesting character in and of himself, he doesn't really explain his situation to them, or we don't know a lot about him at first, so it really requires a lot to know about the series to know who he is. And it's not helped with the game not actively focusing him much, and he just gets sidelined for a little bit, but that hardly matters. Anyway, soon enough the train gets captured by an armed militia that basically they're so generic that it doesn't actually matter, and even the two make a joke about it, and we also gotta talk about this right now. The game's comedy is always on point. Like, I legit always said to myself, ha! Just like the manga. And it's really good, and I'm glad that Arakawa was involved in this, because it feels very genuine and it feels in character with everything going on. Anyway, they decide to handle this as they basically make a run trying to just stop them from both sides, and it's a really good way to start off, and you get really pumped to do the adventure. And we might as well talk about the gameplay, and it's alright. Nothing bad, but it has problems that will make it a lot harder to get into, if I'm being fair and honest. The game's an action RPG, though when I say a simple action RPG, I mean a really simple. The game has a simple combo that it's not bad, it feels like it at least has some weight to it all. The problem is this can apply to the general game of course, is that everything's a bit slow, like everything you do is kinda slow. Kinda like Ryu from Ninja Gaiden. I know that sounds weird, but that's always what it felt to me. I mean, your speed is very slow, making it harder to get through levels since these levels are big for some reason, like really long, and it takes a while to even reach the other side, so you'll notice sometimes there'll be dodge rolling, but not too much in the early parts, but still, it just makes it feel faster to just run through. And the combo in and of itself is slow. Like, when I say it's slow, it's more like it has weight to it. You're stuck to it until it's done, and then it can be awkward at times, but I let myself just try to get into it and got used to it pretty quickly. It just still felt odd. There's also something called the Accustrike, but I never got used to it, mostly because I never could get the timing down on my own. Mostly, but I did find an item that allows you to do it every time, so there's that. After a small bit, you can actually use alchemy and combine it with your combo, though it's hard to tell when I can use it or jump. Because you see this combo, since I can use the X button to do with my combos, but I can never do it properly for some reason. Though all it does is just add rock spikes to the floor and just allows you to just hit them longer. There is a wall you can make every so often, which is useful for defensive purposes. More times than not, most reviewers will ignore it, which fair enough. It's not that useful, but it's still useful enough that I kind of find it odd that other reviewers don't talk about it. It can also be used to reach higher places, though there's that too. Though that's not what all your alchemy can do. You also have, well, environmental alchemy weapons, like a sword, a spear, or a knife. There are other unique weapons like this bow or this pogo stick. Yeah, the game can have fun at times. What of it? Well, speaking of weapons, you can also make environmental weapons like this cannon or machine gun or just a bomb. Though that one is actually pretty useless, like I could never really use it right. You'll usually have a choice between two of these, and more times than not you'll use one over the other, since more times than not one is just outright useless and most times. And how the bombs can only be used for like one boss that was actually useful for. Though we're not alone in our fight, since we got our bro Al here. He was helpful in fights too, like a little too helpful if I'm being honest. I mean, he nearly killed the first boss on his own. I was still really trying to get into the mechanics, so it was a bit funny to me at least. He is stronger than you and has more health, so he can take a lot more damage than you are and can deal with some foes a little more easier. There are some weapons he can use at times, but break for some reason. I'm not entirely sure why. He also gets a powerful tackle move that's useful for getting foes on the floor, if you could do that. I couldn't do it at times, but it helps. You can also charge up your alchemy bar so you can use a special move when you press it. It's really useful. I only ever did it a few times for some reason. I don't know why. Though the more important benefits from your bro is that you can have access to frenzy mode. That gives you more attack and more XP too. It's never advised to end it. It only ever turns off if you fall down on your back, which can be easily stopped by pressing X to rebound up, so there's that. Or if Al dies, which isn't that common, but it happens sometimes. I really do need to complain about this since this is going to come up later. The combat gets really old really quickly, as you are going to use that combo, this combo in particular, a lot of times, and it's going to be very, very stale. And I mean, most enemies don't even challenge you that much since this is a numbers game, and it's kind of why I'm not a fan of ARPGs, since, yeah, you can learn the mechanics, or you could just spam your attack until your numbers are bigger than theirs. And yes, you could argue that for all RPGs, but at least an RPG needs you to think about your moves a lot more carefully, rather than an action RPG where you could just fling your move just randomly. And that's the combat. Really, in the end, it seems fine at first, but a lot of the problems actually come up way more once you start actually seeing it in the later parts, because I'll mention it there when it comes time to mention them. After the tutorial, we actually find out that these guys were military police who were framed, I'm guessing, and they all plan to go to his guard because basically there's a calling for alchemists there to have a self-sustaining government. It gets kind of dropped a bit, but it's kind of important. I just had to mention it now, just remember it for later. And the one who's leading this sort of self-alchemist state is actually Wilhelm, the guy who was mentioned earlier, who was a friend of the brothers when they were younger, when they were still training with Izumi, or this girl here. And after a small bit, we actually find out who was leading these guys, this guy here, the armor-piercing alchemist. He's not important, but I had to mention him for later. We soon actually fight him, and he's quite easy. In fact, I think he's one of the easier boss battles in this game. Anyway, he actually tricks Ed into shooting a cannon in front of the train tunnel that makes it impossible for them to use, and we actually leave Armstrong to handle this mess. On our way to trying to find his guard, we actually find some chimeras. Chimeras are monsters that are made from other animals or monsters, it's really hard to tell at times, using alchemy. It's not illegal, but it's not very high class, if that makes sense. And they're mostly gonna just be the most common enemies you're gonna find more times than not. Well, I say more times than not, but there are just gonna be a lot of human enemies as well. Just, you're never gonna find chimeras and humans working together most times than not. We also meet the new character Armony, who's here collecting ether flowers that are used in alchemy for catalytics. And she, for some reason, is not targeted by the chimeras for some reason. And we actually never get an explanation for why, because if anything, this story would have shown me that, yeah, she would have been more likely targeted. Anyway, we try to chase her as we go to his guard, and we find it on fire. Well, actually, it's just this gate for some reason. I'm not entirely sure why it's on fire, and the town is full of chimeras that I can hardly damage for some reason, and it's really odd. I was doing fine before. I wouldn't say I was under-leveled, but for some strange reason, the enemies here, they're just way too high in defense for some reason. Should mention now the levels. They're alright. I mean, like, I never felt like my stats were bad, but they never were that great, if I'm being honest. You also get bonus stats, but they're so minor in helpfulness that more times than not, you'll just always want to put them into 1 or 2 stats just for the sake of it. Mostly because only 2 of those stats really matter. I mean, the alchemy stat is useful, but I'll explain that in a moment. Because you see, attack and defense stats are very lacking. I mean, your alchemy stat will raise on its own quite nicely, but your attack and defense stat are just low for some reason. And the alchemy stat just affects alchemy area weapons, you know, like cannons and all that whatnot. So it does actually have its own uses. Anyway, after a cutscene, we actually find out where Armony went. She went to a church so she could leave some flowers for her sister, Celine Wilhelm. Yes, the daughter of the man and the brother's friend. This comes to a shock to them, though more shocking is that at night, there are way more chimeras at night for some reason. They don't actually ever explain why this is, which is actually really bizarre if anything, since, you know, Misao Arakawa is a really good writer and likes to try to explain things more than enough. We also meet the villain of this story, Camilla, and I just don't like her design. I don't hate it, but it feels off, like generic evil look, I guess, but it's not that. I don't know how to explain it to someone. Maybe it's because I think Arakawa's designs are so nice that I expected a little more. Maybe that's it. she actually sicks one of her chimeras at us, and this one actually confused me a bit, since it's so weird. This is the only time we'll ever face this guy, even though it seems like she has a connection to this one chimera for some reason. I'm not entirely sure, the story doesn't really ever explain this, though I feel like I'm being a little harsh on the game, so let's praise something that's really good, the game's music. It is damn good, like wow good. I made actually sure to listen to the soundtrack for this game, and it's just really nice. I just wish it had a few more tracks for some places, but hey, that's just me. Anyway, after a bit of a rest stop, they actually head to New Hisgard, which is where everyone is now since, again, the town is destroyed, so they just made up New Hisgard. And it's actually full of alchemists that are just gonna give everyone here trouble, since, well, again, the brothers are state alchemists and those guys don't want anything to do with them, so they're like saying shove off, asshole, or just outright kill them, because that's a thing. We actually soon find Harmony, as she was being denied training from these alchemists due to her father's orders not to teach her. And if I'm being fair, these guys actually have one of the more interesting boss fights. They actually control a golem, and the idea is that you need to attack the bosses individually rather than focus on the golem. And the golem actually becomes more of an individual thing for some reason later on. I don't know why, but just there we go. After defeating these 3 alchemists, which again, really easy, won't take you that long, you meet up with Wilhelm, and we actually meet his assistants. Anyway, we actually begin to learn what his goal is as an alchemist. He's basically trying to find, or at least make, the alchemist catalytic. Something kind of like the Philosopher's Stone that just makes transmutation a lot easier rather than just ignoring equivalent exchange. Basically, it's like, you don't negate it, but you're just so reducing it to the point where it's just like, you don't even need that much. He actually sends Harmony out to find ether flowers since they're actually helpful for his research. He also asks us to help her find some more, which now we gotta talk about the weirdest part in this game. You see, for some strange reason, the game wants us to backtrack through the levels that we just went through, with no real difference. There's no change in level design, enemy variety, or even levels. They're still the same, which is quite bizarre if anything. I thought they would have just at least raised the level of some of these enemies so that it's not a slog. Though I mean, like, yeah, you can run past enemies here at this point because they're not really stopping your progress, but still. And what's weirder is that we have to do one level entirely all over again that we just did, which is even more bizarre when we learn that we have to do the same boss fight again, but just with more golem. The only reason that I could think it's here is mostly because maybe Arakawa wanted to use these 3 more, though that's just me. I'm not discounting the idea that they just wanted to use this to just pad the game out, but it's only so odd because this is the only time they pad out the game ever, which is just baffling to say the least. Anyway, after a bit, we decide to actually teach Harmony some alchemy, even though Wilhelm did not want her to. And maybe after a day, I'm not entirely sure, there's no real time span telling us how long it's been. I'm gonna say a few days at the minimum. The only guess I could say how many days is like a few because of this montage that's a music video for some reason. I'm not entirely sure why. Like, if somebody could explain the music video, please do. Anyway, after some training, she actually collapses with a wing on her back. I wonder why. We then decide to call her back to the castle where her father is, and it's being attacked by chimeras for some reason, I'm not entirely sure why, as we had to find the professor. And we learn that Wilhelm was actually making them for some purpose, and he'll explain later. And also, outside, we fight one of the worst boss battles ever. Like, I hate it. And there's only one more boss battle that I hate more than this. I don't even know the name of it for some reason. They never actually name it. Anyway, he's just annoying. You have to turn his seeds into bombs, though you can make some bombs out of some things in the area. And if you don't make him eat one of those bombs, he recovers for no reason. I know I make it sound easy, but it's really not, since the bombs are erratic in movement, so it's hard for him to get him to swallow them. He's just so annoying to fight him, and what's worse, we have another boss fight against this guy. Yeah, and I bet you all forgotten who this guy is, who now has both of his arms in Animal and just decides to fight us again. He also has really high defense for some reason, and it's only gonna get higher. Afterwards, we meet this guy who was controlling the chimeras, and he tries to actually kill us both. But Colonel Mustang, a friend of the boys, and it bears me to repeat that if you don't know the series, you won't know who this guy is, or it won't even matter. He tells the guy to just basically lock them up since it'd be easier to do that and whatnot. And this is a part of the Colonel's plan since he wants him to rile up and just break out of the prison, distracting them for more time. Since the Colonel is here to investigate what's going on here. Anyway, Greta, oh, I forgot that one of Wilhelm's assistant makes this guy believe that Wilhelm is actually trying to betray him and basically puts an order out for him to get arrested and capture his daughter since she basically figured out that she's actually the alchemic catalyst for some reason, though I'll get to that in a moment. But that's had to be put on hold as the escape starts, and where I started to notice that this game becomes only tolerable to this point. Like, it was okay, but now it's only tolerable. See, after this part, damage just starts feeling good enough, and it feels lacking in some fashion. I feel as though they were up for the challenge to fight and just wanted them to just run at time for some reason. Some foes were taking too low of damage. I mean, look at this. It's ridiculous. And you'll notice me running a lot more in this section of the review. We actually soon reach the roof, and now we have to fight the worst boss. This bird thing. He basically flies around and tries to kill us, but I could barely do anything against him. It's just bizarre how much of nothing I could do. It's just weird. You have to shoot him down to the ground, then wail on him, but the times where he does come to the ground is either too far away, or you have to wait for some weird timing bullshit. I actually have to mention alchemy equipment and stuff. Mostly because those stuff are important, since you could actually, like, after a cannon's out of ammo, you can just reload it with some metal you're carrying. And you're usually carrying a lot of items and stuff. This is where my main complaint comes for the game, that it's too easy, but too difficult at the same time. I know that sounds odd. Basically, let me put it to you like this. The enemies are dealing way too high of damage, but you have so much items that it just becomes a slog of, like, just wailing down your opponent time after time, and it just becomes boring. After defeating it, they just escape, and we go to the church, finding Harmony, as we told them to just stay put if they plan to rescue Wilhelm, as we gotta go through the sewers to reach the castle. Also, again, I need to mention this since I never understood the hate for these types of levels. As long as it's good, I think it should hardly matter of where it is, since again, it just needs to be good. Which I think it is, well, except one part where you need to reach this plank here to get progress for some reason. Because other than that, it's fine. And strangely enough, this is actually the last area with the only good boss. I legit think it's actually pretty good. It requires a lot of quick use of area alchemy weapons and having to defend yourself from Chimera, the small Chimera. Though Al can handle that for you, even though if he just blocks your freaking way. Anyway, Harmony was actually following us with the pastor, and I'll mention more about him in a moment, as we actually reach the castle and Wilhelm is there, and he actually explains what's the deal with everything, mostly. So strap in, folks. See, Celine was actually Wilhelm's assistant. She was actually good at alchemy at her age. But since he was trying to use the alchemist catalyst, you know, like test it out to make sure it worked, it didn't, and it actually rebounded on Celine and in a sense killed her. But Wilhelm kinda used it. It's a little hard to explain how, in a way. He basically used it to revive Celine as Harmony, and yeah, Harmony's in shock of this, and soon enough is captured by Greta. And oh no, the army's here too, trying to take Harmony too and capture Wilhelm. But we try to handle them, but there are way too many of them. It's suddenly Mustang and the glorious Armstrong. So glorious. They come in and try to distract them while the brothers try to rescue Harmony, and we have to climb the tower, and you can mostly ignore most of the foes here since they are not a threat in any sort of way. At the very top, we actually find Harmony, who's in chains for some reason, and Greta standing up there. And it's revealed that Greta was Carmilla all along. Bum bum bum. Let's talk about Carmilla. She just doesn't work here. As a villain, she's kinda generic with really no personality, like barely one, and has really very low stakes in this plan. Like, why does she want it? I mean, like, they say she wants to be pretty forever. I'm guessing in a fact, like, I didn't care enough to read that, but whatever. But I just have no idea why else does she want it. I mean, like, yeah, okay, you want to be pretty, what for? I mean, there's gotta be something there, but there's really not. She's a very boring villain. I mean, like, a very generically evil villain can work, as long as you make them interesting to watch. You don't need to make super deep layered villains just to be interesting. They just need to be interesting to watch and want our heroes to win against. It hardly matters now, as she calls up 3 of the Chimera bosses, and this just took too long. It's just so boring. And then she actually explains a bit about more of her plan and why she called alchemists here. Basically, to use the alchemist wing, or the way I'm just gonna call it now for now because it's way easier than saying the alchemist catalyst, is basically that so she can actually use the chimeras as sacrifices for it so she can power it up and make it all more powerful, you know what I mean? Plus, with the alchemists these chimeras were feasting on, it just makes it all the more easier to power it up more, you know? And she almost actually succeeds until William basically throws an ether flower at her, which kind of causes a flux in the flow, and then she suddenly summons Abandon all of a sudden. I would make a joke like, haha, that's a joke, but seriously, when I look at him, I say to myself, that's just Abandon, or Abaddon. And I know it sounds like I'm saying Abandon, but no, Abaddon. Also, his boss theme is just awesome. It sounds like a Dynasty Warrior song, and it's just amazing. Actually, I died while I was listening to it, and I refused to play it since that would mean I would need to do the fight against the 3 bosses, which, fuck that. Anyway, we soon defeat it, and Camilla just dies falling from the tower, and it's Armini's dying as Wilhelm trying to save her and takes her to his alchemy lab. And this was during when the brothers were trying to collect some of the wings so that they could actually put it back in Armini to try to save her. When they try to actually get into the alchemy lab, Mustang and Armstrong actually prevent them from going in because they know what's up and they don't want them to suffer, you know, that deep emotional damage. I'm not entirely sure if you can win this, but I know you can't win it on your first go around without really trying. Anyway, after the fight, the place explodes. It's just, I don't even know what to call this, because yeah, there was no way to help Armini at this point. They were actually given a letter from Armini saying goodbye and thanks for the fun time. The game ends with us leading into Central. In the end, this game is mediocre, and at its absolute worst, it's dull. I loved it at first, but over time, it just got dull. Everything really holds up the game a lot more than I thought, but the gameplay just drags everything down so much that it's hard to go back into it. But I at least know the next game is going to be good. Like, I know like Fullmetal Alchemist 2 is at least decent, from what I've heard. And tell me whatever you want me to cover. I don't mind. I've been feeling like I wanted to do some more requests since it's always more fun to get people to request me to do stuff.